Lovely is Numenor, but my heart resteth not here forever. For here is ending, and there will be an end and the fading, when all is counted and all numbered at last. But yet it will not be enough, not enough. What will Iluvatar, O Iluvatar, give me in that day beyond the end, when my sun faileth? Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 320. In this episode, we'll be taking a close look at the Song of Numenor, an obscure poem of Tolkien's that gets to the heart of Numenor's story. Before we get started on that, I'd like to give a double up air five to our patrons. 3, 2, 1, whoopsht. Hope I didn't catch you off guard. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Jacob Lockham, John H., Scotchy Bobo, and Eru27. Become a patron by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. Your financial support helps the Tolkien Road to keep on evering on and land you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad. Check out truemythspress.com for Tolkien Road merch like t-shirts, signed copies of my books, and the glorious Two Trees camper mug, just like this right here. Use promo code LOST320 to get 10% off your order. That's truemythspress.com. Check out the show notes for the link. And hey, YouTube, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below. All right. So, that bit of poetry I read at the beginning is from a passage in The Lost Road, right here. Actually, it's from a footnote in The Lost Road. So we'll get a little bit into that. What was the purpose of Numenor? Many of you know that I have argued that Numenor's purpose went beyond being a mere reward for the descendants of the Edain and seemed to be filled with symbolism and rituals intended to point them to a greater destiny both in this world and beyond it. I've explored that in other videos. We've talked about that on our Rings of Power reaction videos. But I'm really starting to get into those kinds of questions more as I begin work on my next book. And as I was reading through The Lost Road recently, I found this poem and just was blown away by its beauty, but also how it gets really to the heart of the Númenorian legend, like what's really there, what Tolkien was thinking when he first conceived of this legend, right back in the late 30s. So let's talk about a little background of it first. It's found in the History of Middle-earth, Part 5, The Lost Road and Other Writings. You can go back and watch our video we did on this particular volume of the History of Middle-earth, but it's going to be in the section titled The Lost Road, and you have to go all the way to the footnote or to the endnotes, footnotes, endnotes, whatever you want to call them. Notes on the Númenorian chapters of The Lost Road, and it's in note number 12 right there, in which Christopher gives some context for it. Tolkien actually wrote this thing in what he was calling Edain at that time. It's a form of Elvish, but there's a translation given there as well. And that's the translation that's given in the text is the one we're going to be using as we discuss this Song of Numenor. The Lost Road is a legend that was written, is a story that was written in the late 30s. It's a really interesting story. I hope we can do kind of a focused view of what we have from the Lost Road, maybe sometime in the new year, sometime in 2023, because I think it'd be worth spending some time just talking about this, especially now that the Rings of Power is out and Numenor is kind of a little bit more known now than it maybe previously was on the popular scale. I think it's fascinating to go back and understand the origins of the legend, and it's really found in the Lost Road, right? That's the first place where Tolkien really wrote in a great deal about this place of Numenor. What's really interesting is that Numenor was not originally a part of the legendarium as we think of it, right? You can kind of think of this as Tolkien wrote the stories that became the Silmarillion, the stories of the First Age. He wrote those going all the way back to World War I, kind of began writing those during World War I. Started giving those kind of a form that's recognizable to us into the early 20s. Had these stories, continued working on them, continued developing the legendarium of that period of time. Wrote The Hobbit in the mid 30s. The Hobbit kind of found its way accidentally into into the Middle Earth Legendarium, the stories of, kind of connected to the stories of the First Age, even though it wasn't in the First Age. He was like, why not just make this little connection here? And then after he wrote The Hobbit and it was somewhat of a success, they wanted him to write its sequel. Tolkien wanted to get the Silmarillion published. He also had The Lost Road, which he had been working on. The Lost Road was an idea that came from his friendship with C.S. Lewis, actually. Many of you know C.S. Lewis wrote the space trilogy, right? Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and That Hideous Strength. Well, the deal was that Tolkien and Lewis kind of weren't big fans of the speculative fiction that was around at that time, and so they challenged one another to see if they could write something better, right? And so Lewis's job from Tolkien said, Lewis, you're going to write the space travel story, and that became Out of the Silent Planet, and then Paralandra and That Hideous Strength. Those stories have been pretty well known for a long time. Tolkien's job was to write the time travel story. Tolkien, of course, it was notoriously slow in writing and getting to and notoriously a perfectionist. So he never really got The Lost Road to the point where he wanted it to be. But his approach to writing this was very interesting. It was not. It wasn't what we kind of generally think of as time travel stories in the popular culture of our time. We probably think of like Back to the Future, right? That's probably the most well-known time travel story. This wasn't about people getting into a time machine and traveling to a different period of time. This was more of a like time overlapping, like two periods of time, an ancient period of time and modern time kind of overlapping in a way. But again, I'm going to save all that until we go into The Lost Road in full and detail in a much later episode. So The Lost Road was begun. He got about 4 chapters into it. The first 2 chapters you wouldn't even recognize how they connect to any of this, probably, unless you like really read it in detail. But chapters 3 and 4 of The Lost Road that Tolkien wrote, they look very familiar, right? These talk about well-known like characters we already know, especially Elendil, right? And there's another character, Elendil, who eventually became Isildur, right, later on. So Elendil and an early version of Isildur are both characters in these later chapters of The Lost Road here. The Lost Road, again, we'll get into how Lost Road became the Notion Club papers and was eventually unfolded into the backstory of The Lord of the Rings, and now, and how it was developed later on into the Middle Earth Legendarium. That's all information for another episode further on down the road, or probably a series of episodes in reality. So that's a little bit of the background here. Let's look at the song in context before. So, like I said, the actual poem, the snippet of which I read at the beginning, is actually found in a footnote / endnote for The Lost Road. But I want to read the context within the story where we get some little snippets of this song so that we have an understanding of how it fit into the story. All right, and I'm going to use some technology here to allow y'all to read along with me if you're on YouTube. The light was fading swiftly as they passed up the paths of the garden amid flowers pale and luminous in the twilight. The trees were shedding sweet night scents. A lomolinde began its thrilling birdsong by a pool. Above them rose the house. Its white walls gleamed as if moonlight was imprisoned in their substance. But there was no moon yet, only a cool light, diffused and shadowless. Through the clear sky, like fragile glass, small stars stabbed their white flames. A voice from a high window came falling down like silver into the pool of twilight where they walked. Elendil knew the voice. It was the voice of Firiel, a maiden of his household, daughter of Orantor. His heart sank, for Firiel was dwelling in his house because Orantor had departed. Men said he was on a long voyage. Others said that he had fled the displeasure of the king. Elendil knew that he was on a mission from which he might never return or return too late. And he loved Orantor, and Firiel was fair. Now her voice sang an even song in the Edain tongue, but made by men long ago. The nightingale ceased. Elendil stood still to listen, and the words came to him, far off and strange, as some melody in archaic speech sung sadly in a forgotten twilight in the beginning of man's journey in the world. Ilu iluvatar in care Edain a firimoin, antarota manar valian, numesier. The Father made the world for elves and mortals, and he gave it into the hands of the lords, who are in the west. So sang Firiel on high, until her voice fell sadly to the question with which that song ends. Mantare antava nin illuvatar. Inyare tar itiel, ire anarinia queluva. What will Ilúvatar, O Ilúvatar, give me in that day beyond the end, when my son faileth? Eman antavaro, what will he give indeed, said Elendil, and stood in somber thought. She should not sing that song out of a window, said Elendil, breaking the silence. They sing it otherwise now. Melko cometh back, they say, and the king shall give us the son forever. I know what they say, said Elendil. Do not say it to thy father, nor in his house. He passed in at a dark door, and Elendil, shrugging his shoulders, followed him. All right, so apologies for any mispronunciations on the Elvish there. Did my best. Foreign language is not always my strong suit, but I do love reading Elvish. It's fun to attempt it, and it's just truly beautiful when it rolls off the tongue. So if I got mispronounced anything there, let me know in the comments. So what do we have here? Well, we have this, in the context, we have this conversation going on between Elendil and Herendil, or who we will later be Isildur, right? And they hear this song coming out of a window as they're on this walk, and it is this maiden Firiel, who is the friend of, or the daughter of a friend, right, of Elendil, and this song that she's singing, right, it is, it's kind of a melancholy song, right? Speaking about how lovely Numenor is, but her her heart can't rest here forever. In fact, it actually begins with something. As I was pondering it, it almost reminds me of like a creedal statement, right? The Father made the world for elves and mortals, and he gave it into the hands of the lords, right? It's almost like this statement of belief, right? The Númenorian like statement of belief. They're in the west, they are holy, blessed, and beloved. Save the dark one, he is fallen, right? What's really interesting is that this kind of basic idea of the Numenor, of the downfall, is already here, right? We find, this tension of, she shouldn't be singing this song, right? Or she'll be heard by the wrong people, right? She's in Numenor, but she's singing this song, and it's clear that these are the people, these are like of the faithful, right? The faithful party of Numenor, right? The ones that want to keep to the friendship of the elves, the worship of Ilúvatar, right, as opposed to the worship of Melkor, right? And we see there Melko, right, that Melko has been kind of, there's a version of this song that has come along that talks about Melko will be the one coming back, right? That Melko will be coming back and doing Melkorish things. So we see that tension there, right? That the kind of the forces of evil are taking over Numenor, right, and having their sway in Numenor, one would suppose because they've been deceived by Sauron. So that's the context of this song. Let's look a little more closely at it. So I'm going to read the translation that is in in footnote 12 here. Let me see if I can find it. All right, so I'll highlight it here, and I'll share this with you guys. All right. The Father made the world for elves and mortals, and he gave it into the hands of the lords. They are in the west. They are holy, blessed, and beloved, save the dark one. He is fallen. Melko has gone from earth. It is good. For elves they made the moon, but for men the red sun, which are beautiful. To all they gave in measure the gifts of Ilúvatar. The world is fair, the sky, the seas, the earth, and all that is in them. Lovely is Numenor. But my heart resteth not here forever, for here is ending, and there will be an end and the fading when all is counted, and all are numbered at last. But yet it will not be enough, not enough. What will the Father, O Father, give me in that day beyond the end, when my son faileth? So, let's just kind of parse this a little bit and, understand what's being said in this, what's being sung here. Begins, like I said, with kind of this creedal statement, right? The Father made the world for elves and mortals, elves and men, right? So the Father, who's that referring to? It's referring to Ilúvatar. That's actually the word in the Edain, the Elvish tongue given here. Ilúvatar. All right. So Elu Iluvatar made the world for elves and mortals, for mortal men, and he gave it into the hands of the lords. Who are the lords? They are the Valar, right? Into the hands of the Valar, the lords of the West, right? They are holy, blessed, and beloved, save the Dark One. So it's clear that Firiel, who's singing this song, and when one would suppose Elendil and Herendil view the lords of the West favorably, right? They view them as holy, blessed, and beloved. Save the Dark One, right? The fallen one. He is fallen. That's Melkor, as we would know him, has gone from Earth. It is good. So this is, again, like the whole idea of him being cast out at the end of the first age is here as well, right? It's in this story. I read this and I'm like, well, Tolkien was already working. It's like even from this starting point, he was already working the framework of Middle Earth into this legend, even though it came, even though he maybe didn't conceive of it in that way. It's almost like these stories that he had come up with initially, in his younger years, were just so much a part of him. He had to work them into everything he did. You can see that in a lot of his writings that supposedly aren't related to Middle Earth. I think of even something like Smith of Wootton Major, which we hope to cover here soon on the podcast, along with Greta. I even think of something like that, which came much later on, and it seems to work in a lot of those, a lot of those themes, right? A lot of those ideas from Middle Earth. All right, so for the elves, they made the moon. The lords of the West made the moon, the Valar. But for men, the red sun, which are beautiful. To all they gave in measure the gifts of Iluvatar. The world is fair, the sky, the seas, the earth, and all that is in them. So that's, we get to the end of kind of the first part of this, and it's this: the world is fair. It kind of talks about the moon, the stars, the sun. The world is fair, the sky, the seas, the earth, and all that is in them. They're all fair. It's all beautiful. The world is a wonderful place, right? And she says, lovely is Numenor, right? Maybe even, we're supposed to understand that, like, above all, Numenor is lovely, right? It's this paradise for mortals, this mortal paradise, right? But my heart resteth not here forever. My heart resteth not here forever. If you're familiar at all, if you've read a Calibaith, if you've read other writings that concern Numenor, you know that this question of rest in this world is a key one, and it's a large reason why Numenor eventually falls, because the hearts of men cannot seem to find rest in this world. They want to find rest, and for those who are able to acknowledge that they can't find rest in this world, they're able to pass on in peace, right? They're able to pass out of this world in peace. But it's later on, when they abandon the friendship with the elves and the lords of the West, when they abandon the heartfelt true devotion to Iluvatar, that they begin to fear death, right? They begin to fear passing away from this world, and they become restless, right? They won't allow themselves to fall asleep, right? You have kind of the peaceful death early on of so many of the kings, and later on it's like these agonizing deaths where they're just holding on. They're holding on past where they should. Okay, I think it's a moment. This story maybe, the story of Numenor is kind of a memento mori, right? It's like it should make us think, like, how will I react when it comes time for my death, right? And that's a hard question to answer, but it's worth asking ourselves from time to time. Am I looking just at this world is all that there is, or is there something beyond it? And it's clear that for the faithful of Numenor, from the very beginning of this legend, Tolkien's conception of this legend, the faithful of Numenor look beyond, right? And we see that in the second half of this song. My heart resteth not here forever, for here is ending, and there will be an end in the fading, when all is counted and all numbered at last. But yet it will not be enough, not enough. When will the Father, O Father, give me in that day beyond what will the Father, O Father, give me in that day beyond the end when my son faileth? Yeah, so what's going to be given to me when there is no more world, right? When this world ends completely, okay? Firiel is thinking to that, right? She's looking beyond what's here and now to that. Now, this is not, I don't think this is Firiel's song originally, right? This is a song that had perhaps been around for a long time. It's maybe like a hymn of the Numenorian religion, right? And she's singing it here, and Elendil and Herendil are familiar enough with it to reflect upon it, and to think deeply about it. But that's, it's those final lines that really get to the heart of this legend of Numenor. What is there for me beyond this world, right? The Numenorians know that their lives, even though they live longer lives, their lives are numbered, right? They're mortal as compared to the elves, as compared to the Valar. So what is there for them? This world may be a lovely place, right? How many of us can say that, right? This world is a lovely place. But what is there for me beyond this world? Whether I'm around when it ends for good or whether I end before it does, right? Is there anything for me beyond it? That's really the question that I feel is at the heart of the Númenorian legend. You see it all over the place. You see it in Akalabaith. You see it in the very shape of the island, right? A star-shaped island. They get to Numenor by following this star, and they can see the blessed land of the earth, but it's like the blessed realm of Valinor. They can kind of glimpse it dimly from the very tall mountain, but they can only glimpse it dimly, and they know they can't go there, right? They know they're forbidden from going there, from reaching earthly bliss, right? The undying lands of this world. But instead, when they're standing on that mountain, the Mental Tarma, what are they drawn to? Well, their eyes should be drawn up to the heavens, right? To see the star of Elendil, right? That they're drawn like Elendil to the stars, to the heavens, okay? That their lives are drawn upward. And we see that because they're standing on the Mental Tarma, where they go and they've been given this worship of Ilúvatar, right? That they're supposed to be heaven-oriented, right? Star-oriented, okay? Not necessarily the physical stars, right? But the heavens, right? They're supposed to be oriented to the things that go beyond this world. That's Ilúvatar's will for them. That's why they've been brought to Numenor, right? They can glimpse the undying lands, but they can't go there. That's not for them. They have a greater purpose beyond this world, and that's the key. They have to understand that it's a greater purpose. Okay? Now, this is it's all this doesn't seem like it's a really like negotiable interpretation to me. This seems very intentional on Tolkien's part. Again, we don't necessarily see him saying this is what the story of Numenor is about, except that he actually does say the story of Numenor is about God's sole right to divine worship in one of his letters, right? But what is the point of that worship, right? It's not, see, like, Tolkien would have understood this. It's not about God needing our worship, right? It's not about Ilúvatar needing the worship of the Númenorians. It's about the worship of God makes strong, heals the Númenorians, right? The worship of God heals us, right? The proper worship, the right worship, okay? That's the central question. That's where these stories overlap with Tolkien's own faith, right? So, so it's worth pondering this story, this song, right, that's told here, and understanding that from the very beginning, the Númenorian legend had this connection, right? It had this basis from the mind of Tolkien. So, I think this is just fascinating. It's definitely something I'm going to be exploring in my next book, which I've already, begun good work on, hoping to share more about that with you all in the not too distant future. It's something I'd really, as much as I've struggled with the first, enjoying the first season of the Rings of Power, I'd really love to see them work these kinds of things into the Rings of Power in future seasons, because it's the heart of the story, right? And if you don't have the heart of the story, it's really hard to tell it well. Okay. I wasn't super impressed by that in the first place. Anyway, I didn't want to get too much into a criticism. This isn't about criticism of the show. But it's relevant, right? It's relevant here because the Song of Numenor is, it's not something that Tolkien, he may not have included this in his later writings, but it's not something he left behind in terms of the themes that are in the story, the Akalabaith, all these sorts of things. In fact, it's so beautiful that it kind of makes me wonder. Like this scene is so beautiful. I kind of picture this like, like I could see this happening within the show, right? These are the kinds of things that it's like, why make it up? And I know there's the whole thing about do they have the rights to use this, but you could kind of do something like this, right? You don't have to use the same names or even the same language, but you could probably do something very similar to it. Just a truly kind of beautiful moment where father and son, Elendil and Herendil, aka Isildur, are conversing while they hear this beautiful song, right? Being sung. Okay, so that's the Song of Numenor. What do you guys think? Did you think my interpretation of it is right on? You think it's off base for some reason, let's talk about it in the comments below. All right. Well, hey, I wanted to read a little bit of correspondence. So trying to get back to doing some correspondence on a regular basis. I'm going to read, since we're on the theme of poetry this week, I wanted to read a couple of haiku that were left over. This is from listener John W. And John says, "Greetings, John and Greta. I've been a huge fan of your show since 2017, but I'm not very talkative. I've enjoyed listening on Spotify, and you've got 5-star rating there. I deeply appreciate your talented presentation." So thank you, John. I appreciate the rating over on Spotify. That's awesome to hear. And John shared 3 haiku. So the first one is thoughts on Amazon's Rings of Power. Silver spent, time lost, honor gray, wicked clever, waves of discontent. Very nice, beautiful. The next one is on Akalabath. Dangerous reward, pride cometh before the fall, mountain under waves. Ah, the dangerous reward, I love it. That's great. Yeah, one of the key things that Tolkien said about the Númenorian legend was reward, the perils of reward, that reward is more dangerous for men than punishment, right? I think that's almost the verbatim quote from one of his letters on the themes of Númenor, from the Waldman letter, actually. So good stuff there, John. And his final one on the of the Third Age and the Rings of Power. One ring to find them, deceived for power and pain. Friends will march to war. Very good stuff. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate you. All right. Well, hey, you want to be like John, drop us a line. You can correspond with us in a number of ways. Check out the show notes to learn more. YouTube, TolkienRoad.com, email, Twitter. You can find us easily on Instagram and Facebook. We don't check those as often, but usually we get notified if somebody drops us a line over there. So hopefully that's still working. All right, we'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. All right. Well, that's all for this episode, y'all. Thank you to our amazing patrons, especially the following: John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Jacob Lockham, John H., Scotchy Bobo, Eru27, Ms. Anonymous, Andrew T., Redhawk, Shannon S., Brian O., Emilio P., Zeke F., James A., James L., Chris L., Chuck F., Ozia V., Ish of the Hammer, Teresa C., David of Pints with Jack, Jonathan D., Eric B., Johanna T., Mike M., Robert H., Paul D., Julia, Werty, Matthew W., Joe Bagelman, Chris K., Jacob S., Richard K., Matt R., Garrett P., John W., Eugene D., Chris B., and Daniel S., as well as those celebrating their Patreon anniversary in December of 2022, Zeke F., Shannon S., Emilio P., Brian O., Andrew T., and Amy H. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate our patrons. Thank you all so much for your support. And thanks to everybody for watching and or listening. We will talk at you next time. Bye-bye.